Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ. I am tanned and rested, my friend.
How was your vacation?
Well, let's see. Have you flown across the country with a 2-year-old before?
I have been deathly afraid of doing so, and have not done that.
Have you decided to do that and then bring your mother-in-law along?
That is daring.
Actually, I am blessed to have a great... I would say you really need the mother-in-law if you're going to do the 2-year-old. No, we actually had a very good trip. It was a great week. But I will say the one thing that surprised me was the incivility of my fellow passengers who... I've been flying for 15 years with screaming kids who, and I just put my music on and turn it up a little bit loud and figure, hey, this is par for the course. This is what you sign up for.
Right.
And if you don't like it, sit in first class. But I mean, people were visibly just annoyed and would mutter things under their voice. I don't know what they want me to do. There's really nothing. There's nothing I could do. Do they want me to spank the child?
Have you seen the McSweeney's piece from the other day by Wendy Molyneux, which is titled, "Hello, stranger on the street. Could you please tell me how to take care of my baby?"
Yes. Now, I've not read it, but I think I identify with the piece. It's quite funny. There was one on the way out. There was a woman sitting in front of my son who thought that she could intimidate him by turning around and giving him dirty looks. I'm not joking. This is an adult. This is an adult. And it didn't. It actually pissed him off, and he would cry even more. But what kind of an adult thinks that they can, intimidate and scare a child, and that's okay?
I think if you haven't had kids... and look, I'm not saying I had insight before I had kids either. How you communicate to a toddler is just not intuitive at all. And it's obviously a little bit different from kid to kid. You as a parent have developed a communication style with your own child. And the thought you can sort of just walk in there and use the same kind of facial expressions that an adult would get, is idiotic. But not they're not in the same headspace as you or me.
And then on the way back there was an old guy who now see there was just an eruption of applause from out in my office. Neil Monroe, who's on C-SPAN right now, I guess it's something brilliant because I don't know if you guys probably didn't hear it, but anyway. This old codger on the way back. Now keep in mind there were 5 of us, which is cool. 5 adults, or I guess 4 adults is about what you need to take care of one small child if you're going to fly. So we were seated. I was seated in a different row next to this old codger who was starts complaining to me about my kid. He doesn't know it's my kid. It's Jesus Christ. And I'm like, dude, it's. I actually said it's worse than you think. He's coming with me everywhere I go. But my thing is, look, I would grumble privately or be like, no, I have to pick the flight with the screaming kid. But I wouldn't say something. And I certainly wouldn't try to stare down the kid or intimidate him. And I wouldn't publicly complain about it. Now, if there's a 10-year-old kid who's being a jerk, then I sort of blame the parents. You need to get that kid in line. But what are you going to do to not even a 2-year-old? So anyway, that was my first experience. We had flown with my son once before when he was 9 months old to Seattle, but a 9-month-old sleeps the whole way.
Right.
This was the first time with a toddler, and it's a different world. But by and large,
you didn't take to being strapped in for several hours at a stretch.
It's rough. I don't even like sitting still for 5 hours.
Right.
And we bought him his own seat, which we didn't have to do, but I'm glad we did. And he's obviously in a car seat, and and he had to sit still essentially for 5 hours, and that's tough for a little guy to do. It's tough for a big guy to do. So you should try it though, Bill. It's
my daughter is interested in airplanes. We were disturbed recently because she said out of the blue, "Can girls be pilots?" I don't even know where that came from.
That's interesting. I think it must be the hostile environment that you've created. It must be the patriarchal machismo that you throw off.
I mean, I've read that at age 3 is when kids start making gender distinctions. And so I get that she's kind of grasping to figure out what I see that there are differences between boys and girls. What are they exactly? But like where pilots came from and why it ever occurred to her that there would be a gender barrier there, I just have no idea. I can't pinpoint anywhere. I can't believe it would come from her preschool. She's a very small preschool with 6 kids, and I would think any comment like that would get flagged. I just don't know. But I'm having to fight some of these things much earlier.
It is interesting. Before I knew that I was having boys, I gave a lot of thought about what it would be like to raise a daughter. My wife is a very strong woman, just very, well, you've met her, you know Erin.
She's a small business owner, entrepreneur.
Yeah, she built that. She's tough. I used to joke that if you put Erin and Newt Gingrich in a room together with 2 baseball bats, Erin will come out with 2 bats. And I always thought, like, how, in this environment, I would want to raise a daughter who would be, strong and entrepreneurial, and and how do you encourage that, especially in a culture that still, despite all the politically correct stuff, we still glamorize like Paris Hilton and that sort of image. So how do you avoid the traps of falling into that that sort of thing? I mean, this is probably ironically politically incorrect for me to say, but I've thought I would have encouraged her not to be a cheerleader, but to be, I don't know, playing the sports. Maybe I get in trouble for saying that. I don't know.
Well, look, I'm trying now.
That's a question. Is that a conservative or a liberal thing for me to say? I don't know.
I mean, one would hope at this point that wouldn't fall on ideological lines. That would be an accepted.
But is it intolerant for me? Like, is it intolerant for me to say that, or is it progressive for me to say that I would encourage her not to be a cheerleader, but instead to play sports? I mean, I'm sure that there are.
I mean, certainly 30 years ago, that would be clearly a liberal thing to say, not a conservative thing to say. I would hope now, that people on all sides of the fence would want their daughters to have options and not be tracked, prematurely in one area, just because, an old comic book, an old Archie comic book from 1970 depicts girls as cheerleaders and boys as football players. And so I'm trying to.
I could get in trouble for talking about a hypothetical daughter that I may never have.
Well, I'm in a reverse situation, because here she is. She's 3 years old. Apropos of nothing, she wants to be a princess. We didn't mention princesses to her. We didn't encourage her to wear frilly clothing. I think she basically associates, frilly clothing with being a princess. It doesn't really go much beyond that. But she's already made her own decision that she likes that stuff. So I'm not going to put myself in the position of squelching it and saying you're wrong for liking this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so, at this point, we're semi-encouraging it, but we're also trying to balance it by encouraging other things. And there's a book about how princesses can be anything, and it's all the different ways that princesses can be. They can be baseball players, and they can, they can lift weights and all sorts of stuff. So we're trying to at least define it on our terms. And I'm trying to make sure that she throws a ball like you're supposed to throw a ball. So I'm out there encouraging her playing ball and kicking it and throwing it as high as you can, as far as you can, and trying to make sure that she doesn't just do traditional things by default.
I think you're wise.
I don't know how it's going to work. Society might just be so powerful that any little thing that I do just gets overwhelmed by what's out there in the ether.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing the right thing. I mean, expose her to a variety of opportunities, but I think it would be a mistake to sort of try to tamp down on this thing, because that has all sorts of weird and unintended consequences.
Well, I think we talked about parenting long enough. And
we should do, a side project. I think we could do a parenting show.
We could,
because God knows we have the best advice out there. And there's mommy bloggers. I don't know if there's a lot of daddy bloggers.
Oh, there's definitely there's a dad blog community out there, no question.
Are they?
Absolutely.
We could tap into that.
I don't know if there's
anyway, I guess I also want to get into the pug community because I'm a big pug owner and lover and supporter of the pugs.
They're not being neglected.
It's horrible, some of the stuff that happens to pugs. They're sometimes used, like the whole Michael Vick thing, they're used as victims to train, like pit bulls when they first get started. Pug flying, a lot. I think pugs, I don't even know if they're allowed to fly anymore. A lot of, I think they've died because pugs are not natural. They were bred to look really cute, which makes them incredibly unhealthy. I wouldn't buy a pug from a breeder. I wouldn't want to support that, but I would buy a rescue pug. And so anyway, so the pug thing, if the political thing doesn't work out, I got the daddy blogger thing, I got the pug thing. I wanted to do a book about the pug that saved Christmas. I think I should do a children's book on this. So,
well, you were away for a week. You come back into the office on Monday.
Yeah.
You're expecting to catch up on all the fun Paul Ryan stuff. Maybe talk about the budget. Maybe talk about Medicare. Maybe try to pivot back to jobs. And this Todd Akin guy screws it all up.
Right. Well, and this is dangerous. I remember Bob Novak, before it was revealed that he was having health problems, or I don't know if it was dementia. I forget what it was, but he messed up something, and it was right after he came back from a vacation. And I always worry about that. Like, if you go on vacation and you unplug a little bit, and you come back, and then you're thrust into the news cycle. And that happened to me. I actually went on the BBC, like at 8 o'clock Monday morning, to talk about Todd Akin, having known very little about it. And I wrote something about Todd Akin that same morning that drew the ire of ThinkProgress and got me criticized. And I think that what they did was totally bogus. But I want to get your take on that, Bill, because you read the piece, right?
Yeah, I thought ThinkProgress was unfair. I thought ThinkProgress treated you unfairly. I mean, I understand the emotion of the case here, where most folks looking at Todd Akin's comments and saying this is flat out outrageous, and so for you to take a breath and say, let's look closely at what he said and try to parse it and understand it.
And where did he get this? Number one, what was he saying? And then where did he get this? Because his comments were unfamiliar to me.
Right. I mean, you didn't suggest in your piece at all that you would agree with any of the sentiment there. But you were teasing out, here are the possible things that maybe he was trying to say, and you were articulating that without casting any positive judgment on it.
Right. But thinking out loud is dangerous, and so is writing out loud. I mean, it's a shame, but if you try to number one, my natural inclination is, if everybody else is saying something, I want to sort of go the other direction and sort of delve into it. That's sort of my natural inclination as a writer, and to try to understand. And it's a shame that you can't do that without people attacking.
Well, you can. Just someone's going to be a schmuck about it sometimes. Yeah. And so that's the point. If someone's just simply writing out loud and being transparent about that fact, but you're openly asking questions without necessarily drawing conclusions yet. There's so many targets for the left to go after in this Akin flab. You don't have to pick on the guy who's just asking a question and not pushing an absurd point.
Right.
So I thought ThinkProgress misfired in that respect.
I think that they are building like a dossier, that they're building a rap sheet on anybody that they perceive to be a conservative writer, and that it is they are building a case to be used against me when I get hired by The Guardian, as my friend Josh Trevino found out when he was hired by The Guardian a couple weeks ago, and his tweets were sort of brought out and used against him in an effort to get him fired, to make them reconsider hiring him. So my thinking is that they are that they saw this Todd Akin thing as incredibly toxic, and that they were searching to get on the record anybody who seemed to in any way be taking a contrarian viewpoint on this. But the funny thing about the ThinkProgress piece on me is they actually, I think they misrepresented me twice in one headline. So that's hard to do. So
right. Although the one thing about the piece that you can say is I think they did give you the full quote. I don't think they truncated.
Well, actually, they did.
The
Though. Actually, they did. There's the dots that left out some stuff.
Okay, well, I saw when I read the full quote that they had that it didn't match the headline.
Yeah.
It showed you as someone saying, you say this may or may not be junk science. You're not saying it is junk science. You're saying let's look into and
right.
see
and this is
if there is a...
I agree. And the other problem too, Bill, is that with a blog, this is like things that are happening in real time. I mean, more things come out as time goes on. And I've probably written 5 pieces about Todd Akin, and this was the first one. If I were writing a weekly column, then I wouldn't be thinking out loud as much. But when you're writing a piece,
you would look into the science first and then write the piece. But when you're blogging, that's the whole point of blogging. Is that a blog is not supposed to be a fact-checked, editor-scrubbed piece. It's supposed to be a lot of thinking out loud. So I don't think it's appropriate to knock people who are thinking out loud. You can knock people after they've reached a stupid conclusion, but not.
Now,
you don't have to pick them in the process.
Now, I will say this: I would predict that this will come out if I get hired by the New York Times or the Washington Post in 10 years.
Matt Lewis, who defended Todd Akin,
that will be the bogus story.
But just to clear up anything, what is your take on Todd Akin now that it's been 4 or 5 days after the fact?
Okay, well, interesting. We actually talk about get away from the meta story. So I think that a couple things. Number one, I should obviously say he was wrong. I think to me the most concerning thing was the bad science. The notion that the female body has some way of shutting that down is obviously false. And the fact that a sitting U.S. congressman on the science committee running for U.S. Senate held a provably false position, and not only held it, but was advocating it, is problematic. I think that's the most problematic thing. I think that
and on the science committee, no less.
Yeah, exactly. That's problematic. I think that the line, the legitimate rape line, which became the soundbite, sort of, was, in my opinion, easier to demagogue, but probably less concerning to me, because I think that had he said forcible rape, had he made the distinction between forcible rape and statutory rape. No, by the way, I don't think he should have really been talking about this, but I do think that had he made a distinction,
well, he was asked a question. He was answering a question.
Well, yeah, but
he could have answered it in a less stupid way.
You should not. His answer should have been, okay, you ask me the question, and I'll tell you how he should have responded.
I mean, I believe the question was, why I didn't see the full interview, so forgive me if I'm mistaken. But I presume that he's being asked to defend his position that why are you against abortion in all circumstances, including rape.
I think the thing that we have to focus on here is protecting life, and I'm pro-life, and I care deeply about life, and we can get into the weeds on the details and the exceptions, but to me the most important thing is a culture of life and is standing up for the rights of the unborn, and that's how I feel. That's why I feel passionately about this. I mean, that's basically what he should have said, but he got into the weeds. He was obviously wrong. But again, I think that the legitimate rape line, had he made the distinction between forcible rape and, say, statutory rape, I don't think he should have even gone there, but had he done that, I think it would have been much less damaging. And by the way, there's a great Reason magazine, that libertarian outlet, Reason video, that I linked to the other day about statutory rape. And there's a story of this couple. They've been married for 10 years. This guy was like 19. His girlfriend was 16. That is statutory rape. He is now on a sex offender. So they were both teenagers, but still illegal. But they've been married for 10 years. That guy is still on a sex offender list. He went to jail for statutory rape, and he still has to register as a sex offender. I think that's ridiculous. And clearly there's a distinction between that guy and the guy who grabs you in a dark alley. Now, both are illegal, but is it wrong to make a distinction between those two? I don't think that's right. I think there's a clear distinction. So I think he got a little bit of a bum rap on that part of it. Now, I think the Republican Party completely mishandled it. Obviously, what he said was horrible. It was stupid. But I think that that they mishandled it in the sense that haven't people done worse than saying something stupid? I mean, isn't Chappaquiddick worse? Isn't David Vitter, being on the Madams list and visiting, paying prostitutes? Isn't that worse? Isn't Jennifer Flowers? I mean, this guy said something really stupid.
The Republican Party stood by David Vitter,
right,
and did not stand by Todd Akin.
No, and I think that the response from the Republican Party should have been, what he said is wrong. It is very stupid. He needs to apologize, and he will still make a very good senator, and he will be better than Claire McCaskill. I think that's what they should have done. Now, they made a bet that they could bully him and force him out. And I think that they made a wrong bet. And now and
I assume the party wasn't too keen on his getting the nomination in the first place.
Well, there's all these asterisks to the story, and part of the problem is that he got the nomination partly because Claire McCaskill picked him. He was her hand-picked adversary. She helped him win.
She ran reverse psychology ads,
Operation Chaos,
saying Todd Akin's too conservative for Missouri, and then Todd Akin takes that and says Claire McCaskill says I'm too conservative. That's just what we need, right. And the Republican voters there took the bait.
And there were other candidates, including Sarah Steelman, who was endorsed by Sarah Palin. And so part of his problem is that he doesn't really have a base outside of Mike Huckabee and some homeschoolers. And this goes to my topic. I guess a couple things of interest here. One is my gang warfare analogy, which we've talked about before. Politics is becoming like gang, right? It's tribalism. You go to prison, you got to decide which gang you're going to join. You need someone having your back. Well, Todd Akin doesn't have a gang. Nobody has his back, and so he was out there alone. And Rush Limbaugh brought up, I don't think he was the first, but this point of epistemic closure is interesting. I think part of the reason that Todd Akin said this to begin with is this phenomenon. Number one, he was a congressman, which means people kiss his butt and don't tell him he does something wrong. Number two, he represented a district which was very insular, and he was isolated and insulated from. In other words, his brand of social conservatism probably played very well, and he didn't have to confront in his congressional district a lot of dissenting opinions. The other problem was his campaign. His family ran his campaign, which means that there wasn't like an expert brought in from outside who had run 10 campaigns earlier and was from New York State, who might have overheard this line. I mean, politicians are like criminals. They usually don't get busted the first time they say something stupid. They usually say something stupid a few times, and then they get busted the third or fourth time they say it. a staffer from outside might have heard him say that, might have flagged it as offensive or problematic, or just flat. They might have done a Google search and found out it was wrong, and might have stopped it. So, but I think that this perfect storm of the fact that the guy had been a congressman, nobody tells him the emperor has no clothes on. He represented a very insulated district, and his family ran his campaign. Created this false sense of security, which allowed him to say something stupid. And I think Claire McCaskill knew she probably had heard him say this thing before. She probably had trackers who knew this was coming. They waited till he got the nomination. And they should have waited another 24 hours before it dropped.
Well, I mean, he made the comment. You only sit up for. He made a comment on TV. It wasn't at a fundraiser caught in the corner by a C-SPAN microphone. I mean, it was on local TV.
But I don't think it aired. I think that it was taped. But in any event, I think that. But going back to my point earlier, this guy said he said something very stupid. He needed to apologize. Why did the Republican Party throw him under the bus? They thought that they could muscle him out and bully him out. I think they should have. Now there's a problem because now, like, let's say a month from now, when we're all focused on the next big scandal, and he's up by a point or down by 3 points or whatever. Now they've poisoned the well. Claire McCaskill can run all these, TV ads of the Republican chairman calling on him to step down. Why? I don't get. Rush Limbaugh said it the other day. The other side circles the wagons. We have a firing circle, or something to that effect. I do resent. I do. Here's the thing. I was, even though I don't really like Todd Akin. Never wrote about him. I don't think before he got the nomination. But there is something I like about his moxie. There is something I like about him saying to the NRSC and Karl Rove and Reince Priebus, no, you're not going to push me out. I do like something about that.
Now, there's two things I have to say in response. One is about the Republican Party response, and one is about Rush. Which way do you want me to go first?
Rush.
So you touched on this, but I just want people to really get this. Rush said on Tuesday that Todd Akin's problem was that he only talks to people who think like him. And he's not having his views challenged enough. And for anyone on the left listening to me right now is saying, "You've got to be kidding me." Does Rush hear himself talk? Rush is like the epicenter of what's the phrase again? Epistemic closure.
I agree. It's a weird.
He is the echo chamber. He is the king of the echo chamber.
I agree with you. He is a weird person to deliver that message, but I think he was totally right. I think he was completely right.
Oh, I agree, but I think I would argue that, both sides have echo chambers. Both sides have times when some challenging of their views would be healthy for them. But I think the right has a much bigger problem with this right now than the left, I would argue. And I think Rush is cause number one of that problem, because you listen to his show, and I tend to check in from time to time. He is constantly spouting just ludicrous political analysis. Forget his policy positions. His explanation of why things are is ridiculous. But he presents himself as the educator of the conservative masses, and obviously a lot of conservatives believe his take on things.
But sometimes he's right. I think he was totally right about this. He was totally right that.
Oh yes,
that was great. That's really good analysis.
But is he going to be introspective and change his show and say, maybe I should find a way to incorporate some views that challenge what I think, so my listeners don't get stuck in this closed loop that Todd Akin got stuck in. I don't think he's going to do that.
I feel about... Here's the thing with diversity, okay? I don't believe every college should be 100% diverse. But I think the college system should be diverse. So, in other words, if there are schools, for example, like Hampton-Sydney College is an all-male school, I don't think that they should be forced to integrate. Now, if the entire university system in America was all male. I think that would obviously be horrible, and we should change it. So I think that Rush Limbaugh is part of a diet, and I feel about him the way I feel about Joel Osteen from a theological standpoint. If your entire religious, spiritual experience were, you can do it, positive thinking, that would be horrible. But I believe that if Joel Osteen is a part of your spiritual diet, then that's fine. Then that's actually good. Because there's a lot of negativity out there. It doesn't hurt for a half hour a week to hear some guy telling you, you can make it, God wants you to succeed. That's fine. God has big plans for you. That's fine as long as it's balanced with other theological messages, which I think is a broader perspective of Christianity. And I would say the same thing about Rush Limbaugh. Rush is there to provide balance to a liberal media. If all you do is listen to Rush and watch Fox, then you will obviously not be exposing yourself to diversity of opinion, and that's problematic. But if you listen to Rush for an hour a day and then watch Chris Matthews, as I often do, then I think it's terrific. I have diversity, not because Rush Limbaugh has to be, although he says he is equal time. Rush Limbaugh doesn't need to be fair and balanced for me to get diversity. He has his.
I would argue that he has to be a.
His role is to provide balance.
I'm not saying it makes sense for Rush to be the. I don't think Rush needs to be the PBS News. I mean, I'm just speaking from the perspective of what would be good for the conservative movement. If I was a conservative movement poobah, what would I want to see occur to enrich my my fellow movement members? So Rush becoming PBS NewsHour is not that. You still want him to be a conservative opinionator, but if he is on a regular basis misinforming my conservative colleagues to the point where people start popping off total nonsense when they run for office, someone's going to tell me, can I do something to solve this problem? Because my team is stuck in this closed loop that's spinning them so wildly outside the mainstream. That's what I would be. I think Rush could be a conservative talk show host and not be a font of misinformation at the same time.
Well, I certainly think we should always try to get our facts straight whenever possible. For me, again, the model is that he is there to balance a predominantly liberal media. But as an individual, you should not, no matter what your philosophy is, you should expose yourself to opposing viewpoints and read people that you don't agree with. I mean, that's.
But do you agree? Put the left equation of this aside. Does the right have a problem now with being in a closed loop? Is Todd Akin an isolated example, or is there some deeper problem here that conservatives that their diet is imbalanced? They're having they're not listening to Michelle Obama. They're eating too much junk food and not broadening what's on their plate.
I honestly don't think this is a problem specific to the right. I think this is a phenomenon in America. Because I think that it used to be we all watched the same TV shows. We had these shared experiences. We all listened to the same music, watched the same shows, and things have become fragmented. There's much more niche marketing. You could go all day watching Rachel Maddow, current TV. You can hide from diverse opinions and opposing viewpoints if you want. Whether it's on the right. You can sort of bury your head in the sand and live in a bubble, no matter what it is that you believe. And so I think that's really what's partially responsible for this phenomenon. I don't think it's unique to the right. I think that that it just happens to be Akin's what we're talking about right now.
So the other thought I had in talking about your critique of the Republican Party response to them, their knee-jerk response trying to force him out. Why would they do that when they have not done that across the board? They did not do that with David Vitter, for example. They've stuck by him, and he's still there today. I think what shifted here is the gender gap. Yeah. There has been an enormous gender gap opened up. I mean, it's always been there to some degree, but a gender gap can be a wash. If Democrats are winning with women by 10 points, Republicans are winning with men by 10 points, then it's a gap, but it doesn't tilt the balance. But right now, it seems that that gap is slanted, so there's a bigger gap for favoring Democrats with women that's not being fully offset with Republicans and men. And Democrats have been pushing the war on women rubric for several months now, and they did it with the contraception debate. They did it with some of the state bills about forced vaginal ultrasounds.
And that's arguably why Bob McDonnell wasn't really on the short list. Remember that thesis,
right? Because he got caught up in that controversy with the bill in Virginia. I think there were other kind of isolated examples out there at the state level that were eyebrow raising. Now you have Todd Akin, and I'm assuming that the leading elected Republican Party said, okay, no mas. We have not succeeded in turning the war on women charges around, and we can only take on so much water here if we're not going to get decimated in 2 months. So you, Todd Akin, you got to get tossed overboard.
No, I think
I have to think that.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I think it was all about political expedience. It was not because they thought that what he said was necessarily made him a horrible person. Because again, David Vitter. Let's call on him to step down. He actually did something. This guy, Todd Akin, said something really stupid. Granted. He did not drive somebody off a bridge or go to a prostitute. There are a lot of people who've done. So my thing is, I think that if Akin had done this a month later, it very well could be that some of the same people who were calling on him to resign would have been defending him shamelessly because of different political times. I think that you're right. It plays into that narrative. This was a political decision to push him overboard. But see, my thing is, I don't let winning or losing drive my analysis. And that may shock. That's concerning to some Republicans and conservatives who only see this through that prism. As
you've argued, sometimes winning is losing and losing is winning. So if that's the case, why make that your primary focus?
I just think it's interesting that, here's part of it too, Bill. I always think, and I think, here's what I think played into Rush Limbaugh. Rush did not call, he said some bad, he had some harsh words for Akin, but he stopped short of calling for him to step down. Rush remembers what he said on ESPN in 2003 about Donovan McNabb and the furor that erupted, and how people were calling on him, and how he was punished even later when he wanted to be a partial owner of an NFL team and they wouldn't let him. I have a lot of sympathy, having done TV, and for people who say things stupid, because we all say things stupid sometimes. No matter how smart you are, if you do enough media, it's possible that you could say something ill-informed or just plain dumb. So I have a certain amount of understanding for that. And I also... I like loyalty. James Carville wrote that book a few years ago, The Case for Stickin'. Say what you will about Bill Clinton. I always admired Bill Clinton in the sense that he did not back down, and he stuck things out, and he was tough, and he didn't quit, and he didn't give up. And I think there's something to be said for that. I really do. Bill Clinton did a lot of bad things. He's not a great person, but Carville, I've admired that thing about not selling out people and not throwing them under the bus because it's politically expedient. And so, as much as I have to reiterate, the guy said something stupid. He was entirely wrong. I also think that it is amazing how quickly. I can't think of another case where anybody has been thrown under the bus this quickly, ever, before. I
think the combination, of this gender gap problem and the fact there was this deadline that was 36 hours away from the gap in the first place was a set of events that forced a lot of folks to spring into action. There's
a great line from The Simpsons where Homer Simpson wants to put Grandpa. It was Homer. I think it was Homer wants to give away the dog, Santa's Little Helper. And Lisa said, what? Are you just going to throw Grandpa away when he's no good anymore? Something like that. And Homer says, when they try to take me away, I want you fighting for me. When they try to put you away. I mean, this, it is amazing how quickly they turned on this guy and just, does he have no friend? You have to be in a gang. See, that's why there aren't moderates anymore. You've got, I'm not saying Akin's a moderate, although he was not the Tea Party favorite. But there's a reason why you go to one side or the other and you stick to that side. It's because, when they try to take me down, it would be helpful if Eric Erickson defends me, and if Jonah Goldberg defends me, and you name the people on my quote unquote team. It would be very helpful if they would step in and defend me. But what happens if they don't? What happens if ThinkProgress tries to take me down, and nobody, I turn around, hey, nobody comes to my defense. See, that's why you don't want to stray too far from your team. And so that's why we have this.
There's a small team of media pundits that see themselves as the paragons of centrism, and they've tried to elevate, Mike Bloomberg or David Walker or certain senators who break party ranks from time to time, but that their team just isn't that big, and so it doesn't have as much of an effect as the more organized forces on the left and the right.
Yeah, man, you don't want to be if you were out in the yard and somebody shanks you. You want someone to have your back, and if you're not on a team, and so my point is, now obviously I risk this all the time by attacking essentially everybody, and sort of throwing caution into the wind. But I do think that this is.
You have a posse of the Daily Caller that, and that's the only posse you need right now.
Well, I will say this: it is nice to have to be at a place that will have your back. And that defends the people who are there. It is a nice thing. It's like the quarter. If you're a quarterback, you want to know that if you go for another 5 yards and you get injured, you're going to get you're not going to lose your job because of injury. So there is something empowering about that. But look, I think it's entirely possible that someday. I become unemployable because I've said so many things and written so many truthful and yet harsh things about so many people in this business that I become toxic. That's you sort of have to accept that, or else you become.
I think in your field, making enemies is a calling card at this point, not a.
I hope so.
Not a demerit.
I try. People have really thin skins. It's amazing that other people who write critical things about people have the thinnest skin in the world. It's bizarre, but that's sort of what you sign up for when you do this, So.
Can I shift us back to political expediency for a second?
Let's keep talking about me, Bill. This is all about me. I'm talking about anything. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Because I am fascinated, though, that the Republican Party has sort of walked into this wall of war on women over and over again this year, and they seem to keep believing that it's the Democrats that are going to overreach. The Democrats are going to blow the Catholic vote. They're going to see that they're pandering to this narrow special interest, and. They even had Campbell Brown out there at one point saying, Barack Obama was condescending to women. This is going to blow up in his face. Yet the gender gap just seems to grow and grow and grow. And I feel like a 180 has happened with Republicans and reproductive issues. Whereas in the 90s, I thought the conservative movement was really savvy in pushing issues around late-term abortion and parental notification. They found the parts of the argument that were the toughest for the left to defend. And look, I am for judicial bypass for adolescents. I am for medically necessary late-term abortion. So I'm not talking about the substance here, but the politics, obviously, is very tricky.
Well, that's why I assume that Akin should have been talking about exceptions because
and so what's happened now, so Republicans had this great success in the 90s putting Democrats on the defensive about these issues to the point where a lot of them just capitulated completely and voted for the things Republicans wanted to vote for, chipping away at the right to abortion. And it seems like over the past 10 years, all those strategic lessons have been completely washed away. And instead, you're seeing more Republicans, going headlong into, let's have no exceptions for abortion. Let's not cover contraception with insurance packages. Just walking into every weak part of their own argument, chin first. And no matter how many times you guys are getting beat upside the head, just keep going back at it, which I just don't, I don't understand how the strategic institutional knowledge degraded so quickly.
Well, I think, first let me talk about the exceptions point, because you're right. I think if you're talking about life, you're winning if you're a conservative. And if you're talking about exceptions, you're losing. You should not talk about them. And the problem is that exceptions are a compromise. If you are pro-life, you may, for political purposes, be in favor of exceptions in the case of rape and incest or the life of the mother. And that very well could save unborn lives, a lot of unborn lives. And that's a political compromise. But the problem is it's also intellectually inconsistent with the idea that all life is precious and that life begins with conception. So people...
I mean, just to understand your perspective, I think some folks left don't always grasp this. If you believe abortion is murder, if that's your premise, abortion is murdering a baby, it's hard to get to the point, well, it's murdering a baby, but it's okay in this circumstance. Murder is okay here. Now, the tough part, and this is where, again, as much as late-term abortion and parental notification issues are the weak spot for us, they elevate the toughest part of your position to argue on the right, having to say, yes, if you were raped, you really do have to carry that baby to term. That's a tough argument. That's your weakest part of your argument. And for the most part, the right has not emphasized it, and now they're going out of their way to emphasize it.
Well, some pro-lifers, like the mainstream pro-life community has made a tactical decision that to have these exceptions, which will make the pro-life position much more palatable and popular. And it also happens to have the benefit of saving lives. You could say, look, I don't like any abortion, but for the sake of saving the vast majority of lives, we will support a position that we are pro-life with the exception of rape, incest, life of the mother. It's intellectually inconsistent. We're okay with that because politics is messy, compromise is messy. This is a compromise that will do good, that will be better than what we have today. It's not the perfect, but don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Now, if you're a purist, if you're a purist and you care about being intellectually consistent, you're not going to like that because it undermines your point. Intellectually, your point that life is precious and that life begins with conception and that abortion is murder. It's a very difficult thing. Conservative politicians much better off not delving into this. Don't take the bait. Don't get into the weeds. Now, I do it because I'm not a politician.
Here's Paul Ryan. Here's Paul Ryan. It's supposed to be the consummate communicator of the next generation of conservatives. And he's on his campaign plane yesterday, and he's being peppered with these questions. And he's trying to stay on message. He's trying not to get into the weeds. Rape is rape. Romney's ahead of the ticket. Romney calls the shots. He's for exceptions. I'm fine with that. And then he has to say, well, I think Romney's position of exceptions is a good first step. Well, you just gave away the game. You just gave away the fact that you see this as a pathway to having no exceptions at all. And I can't understand why it's just taking the bait over and over again. I just find it bizarre.
Well, I think you talk about Ryan's communication prowess. I mean, I think he's much more adept at talking about the budget than anything else. I mean, that's his bread and butter. Although he is a strong social conservative as well, which, by the way, flies in the face of what all the Ayn Rand speculation said. Which is he a devotee of Ayn Rand or is he a social conservative? He's actually a social conservative, but I think he's much more skilled at talking about the budget and that stuff. But Bill, I want to go back to your first question along these lines. If I get my lights to come back on. Oh, a light bulb burst. That's what it was. Hang on. There we go. I want to go back to talking about the question is like why are conservatives worse at talking about this than they were before, than they were in the 90s? I think there's a couple reasons for that. Mm-hmm. Number one, a theme of this show has been it's harder to be a leader now. It's harder to lead. Newt Gingrich had, and Tom DeLay and others, had much more control over rank-and-file members than John Boehner does. Not saying that it's Boehner's fault. A lot of it, I think, is just institutional. I've written about this before. A lot of people have written about this, about how it's like herding cats now. You have fewer carrots, fewer sticks, and the parties and the bosses are less powerful. Well, they couldn't force out Todd Akin, so clearly they're less powerful. The bosses don't have the power that they used to have. So that's one of the things. They can't enforce talking points. Another point, I think, is that things are cyclical, and Republicans, in a sense, are a victim of their own success. And what I mean by this is, when you've been beaten a lot, when you've lost a lot of elections, you have to become very smart to win, and you have to be have a lot of message discipline. You have the whole, Go Pack videos and tapes that people in the 80s and 90s listened to and help make them more skilled. Then, now we have, though, a new wave of politicians, and Akin's not necessarily in this group, but the Tea Party thing, there are a lot of people who were not politically conscious or active prior to the Tea Party or 9/11, and so they're not as sophisticated politically. And I think that in a way, being on message and having message discipline has almost become like a negative to them. And I think that also part of it is that when you there is an argument for overreaching. It's like when you go to negotiate for a car, if you're selling a car, you ask for more than you'll settle for. And in politics, this is called the Overton window, which essentially means that, and I wrote about this a couple years ago, about how having like Christine O'Donnell and Sharon Angle in the race would make Marco Rubio look moderate. So it does help. Sometimes if you have people on the edges pushing things, pushing for more than you'll settle for, that makes the settled for positions seem moderate. So I think that's part of it too. A lot of things at play here, but what do you think, Bill?
No, I think that that totally makes sense. I think there is, post Gingrich, post Rove, that layer of bureaucracy of the Republican Party and the sort of movement, the one that keeps everybody in line strategically and on message, just really isn't there. And so I get that why things have sort of broken apart in that respect. You're seeing a lot more division on the right than you've had in certainly my lifetime. And so I would leave it at that point. I'm still a little fascinated with the fact that what worked for conservatives in the 90s is being ignored. You would think that even if you were a diehard rank and file person, you would remember that the chip away strategy was working. That was the heyday of conservatives and abortion politics.
But my point is, I think a lot of the people involved today don't have that institutional memory. They weren't activists or candidates during the 90s. They were alive. they were children. But if you weren't involved at any level, it's not the same thing. And in fact, they would say, look, they sold out the contract for America. It didn't work. What they were trying to do, Roe versus Wade didn't get overturned. They didn't accomplish it because they were being too timid. Mm-hmm. They didn't do anything. That's what that might be their. I'm putting words in their mouth, but you could say,
right.
So what did it get us? Roe versus Wade wasn't overturned. What good was it? It didn't get us anywhere.
I mean, you can say there is a significant restriction on abortion access between now and 20 years ago. I mean, Mississippi, you practically can't get an abortion right now. They've pushed what's constitutionally legal, to its outer bound. And that's not a small achievement for the right here. But I could see, some people on the left look at Obamacare and say this isn't single payer, it's not good enough. I can see folks on the right saying restricting access isn't good enough for me if there's still, how many abortions per year. So it's over 1 million or something like that. So if you think that's too much, then that's going to stick in your craw.
So whatever the case, whatever the case may be, though, I do accept your. I think you do have an interesting point and about how today's Republicans are in some ways less politically astute and savvy. Some of them.
We should probably wrap things up. I do want to get your quick preview or your quick take. What does Romney need to do? What should he do at the convention next week? Does he need to stick to his embrace of Ryan, drive Medicare, drive budget issues, stick with the welfare charge, even though it's the fact checkers don't seem to care for it? Or does he need to do a different twist and have some more wrinkles on the message now that there's going to be a wider audience watching? Does he need to have more swing vote tailored messaging than he's had today?
Good question. I don't know. I will say I think a couple things I think will be interesting to watch. One, the diversity is going to be amazing. There are a lot. Chris Cillizza has made this point. There's more, ethnic diversity in the Democratic Party, but in terms of rising star leaders, it's the Republican Party, and many of them are going to be on display at the convention. So I don't know how much conventions move the needle anymore. They're not as widely watched as they used to be, but you are going to see a party convention that looks more like America than you've seen before. And Bush in 2000, as you'll recall, sort of tapped into this as well, highlighting various, whether it's Colin Powell or Condi Rice or Rudy Giuliani, who is like a pro-choice Republican, so philosophical diversity, ethnic diversity, all that. That'll be interesting. I think it's going to be. I think it's important that there not be. You don't want any mistakes. As much as I love the '92 Pat Buchanan speech, you probably don't want anything like that coming out of it. I also think that. What about this hurricane? I mean, that's
I don't know.
Like, who knows? But that could be a big deal.
And maybe only the Republican Party gets screwed by this, but we should be said both parties have taken a risk pushing the conventions all the way into late August and September in the middle of hurricane season and then having their conventions in hurricane territory. It's a pretty dicey move that they've both chosen to take.
Yeah, I like Arizona. Phoenix might have been nice, but that immigration bill out there doomed them, I think. So, but it will be fascinating to watch. I think that my guess is that assuming it happens, the big takeaway for me, I think, might be the how diverse the Republican Party is becoming, and including these rising stars, many of whom will be featured prominent spots. And diversity, there's going to be Mia Love, who's an African American. Actually, I forget where she's from, but a black Republican running for Congress in Utah.
I thought she was originally from New York, but now
she's an immigrant. She's also a Mormon. She lives in Utah. Interesting.
Right. I know she was a convert, but I thought she was born here, so I could be wrong.
But I could be wrong. You're going to have obviously like Marco Rubio. You're going to have Chris Christie, New Jersey. That's that giving a big keynote. So
how mean can Christie be?
He can be pretty mean.
But I mean, how mean should he be on this stage as a keynoter? Should he tone it down?
The question is like, is he? I think maybe it helps Romney if he's the attack dog. But on the other hand, like, what about Chris Christie's career? I mean, there's maybe a little tension there. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see his tone and what direction he goes with that.
Certainly, the trend of Republican conventions is high levels of snark. Whether it's Sarah Palin in 2008 or whether it's Zell Miller in 2004 and Schwarzenegger in 2004, even going back to being Buchanan in 92. They've had hard edges at times, and sometimes it's worked. 2004 worked.
And, Texas governor saying George Bush was born with a silver foot in his mouth. I mean,
well, that was 88. Look, Democrats loved that speech, but Dukakis lost, and people loved Buchanan in 92, but Bush lost. And Palin's speech, but Palin lost for Buchanan. I mean, 2004 was the one time I feel like that hard edge convention actually paid off because it was a national security election, and being rough around the edges sort of fit
and also
that mood.
having a Democrat, Zell Miller, do some of that.
Being the hard edge turncoat. So I think most of the time you want a soft edge on your convention. You're speaking to a much wider audience.
You think it should be the DMZ convention, not the RNC convention.
Go read Reagan's 1980 convention speech. That's not a hard edge speech. That's not a welfare queen speech. He was talking to a wider audience.
We can learn from Mozart, but as Costanza said, we can learn from Reagan, but as Costanza said, that's like going to Mozart and saying, "Hey, teach me how to play piano like you." I mean, he was the master. Let's be honest. Sorry, I botched the delivery there, but
all right. Well, so you won't be in Tampa, correct?
I'm not planning on going at this point. Never say never, but I have no plans to be there. We've talked about this before. We did an episode where I talked about why. But I will be monitoring it closely. And the Daily Caller will be sending a very large contingent to cover it, so never fear.
Your go-to sub, Kristen Stoltis, will be there. She's doing a panel on turning up the youth
America. I saw some good comments. Apparently a good show last week, so thank her for filling in very ably for me.
We did well, but we missed you. But we'll talk next week as the convention is winding up. So we'll have a fun show next week.
Check us out. We'll be right back here next week in the DMZ. See you then.
Take care.